The nice thing about most public spaces nowadays is you get free Wi-Fi. It's a huge boon. You could do your emails, you can go onto social media, go onto Twitter and see what you're talking about if you're commenting on the show. I can even do some internet banking, which I'm very tempted to do, or I might have been tempted to do before I met a man called Peter Armstrong. Peter Armstrong works for a company called Willis. He's a cybersecurity expert. He's got a history in the military. And then he went and worked for the British government for a couple of years, so secretly that he won't tell you where he did work. But today in the corporate environment, you can tell us you work for Willis, right? You've got the badge on.
Indeed.
Am I nuts to be sitting using the free Wi-Fi, which is so generously provided by Sun International here at Sun City, to do some internet banking? Surely it makes good economic sense for me not to pay for the connectivity myself.
It's an interesting conundrum. So do we have the right to expect that this kind of infrastructure is secure? The answer, of course, is yes. The problem is that there's a level of awareness that's missing in many organizations, such that very fundamental and simple things, what I think of as the equivalent of leaving your phone and your wallet on the table in the restaurant when you go to the loo, you just wouldn't do it. And yet, in a connectivity context, both individuals and organizations don't do some of those simple things, and that means in real life that you can't guarantee that the public Wi-Fi hotspot is secure, and there are some simple attacks that would mean that you would be severely penalised from taking advantage of that.
I want to talk about some of those, because you did some work for a global coffee chain, and they said, we've got coffee shops, we provide free Wi-Fi, and you, being something of an unusually styled tech reprobate, went in and did some sleuthing.
So a public Wi-Fi hotspot is a bit like your Wi-Fi router at home, and it has two passwords, and most people recognize the password to get access to the device, but there's another one which is for the device to be able to connect to the internet. People very rarely change that password. Very often they're ZZZZZZ, so it's not difficult for a bad guy armed with $400, $500 malware to be able to jump onto that device and steal people's credentials, and particularly if those credentials are on an Android device.
Why are Android devices more vulnerable?
So it's not that the technology means that they're less secure, particularly than something like iOS. They are a little bit under some circumstances. But it's the fact that institutional money funds the technology that becomes the attacks. And you get a bigger bang for your buck with Android because it's got 87% penetration of the smart device marketplace.
Institutional money funds the attacks. Explain.
So there is a pyramid of financing and technical capability of this organised crime. Everything that we see from a cyber criminality perspective at some point has been subject to a return on investment judgment about the investment in the technology and what they're going to get back in return. And typically those institutional investors are organised criminality, of course, aggressive conglomerates, and occasionally nation states when they don't have enough of the resources to do what they want to do. And they go where the money is. So smart mobile devices, 87% run on Android, something like 9% on iOS. You invest in Android.
Yeah, and so we have these structures where you can go and buy malware, which is malicious software, online. You can pay $400 or $500. If you want better, you can pay a little bit more. And there are even support mechanisms.
Exactly.
So you have a bit of a problem with installation, a little bit like you might phone up Microsoft to say, oh, I've got a problem with Windows 10. You go, I have a problem with malware 7. Please, can you help me? And there are people in the background sitting somewhere in the world, you don't know where, who provide you with a service.
This is exactly right. When you buy a high-functioning virus, something like Citadel that attacks high street banks and payment settlement systems, then there's a lot of sophistication and complexity in the application. And often it's very difficult to get to grips with it. Sometimes it doesn't work as well as it should. So when you buy this stuff, and they're expensive pieces of software, you also buy a maintenance and support contract in exactly the same way that you do in the legitimate world.
Now, back to the coffee shop scenario, you go in there armed with some malware and you sit for a couple of hours and you manage to break into all kinds of devices of customers who come into that environment.
Yeah, it's so without helping those who are apprentice bad guys.
Absolutely.
Recognizing the nature of the device, the name of the device allows you to get to a default password. If you've bought particular malware from the dark web for, as you say, $400 or $500, then you can jump onto that device by usurping the password that's not been changed, and every time anyone logs on to that public Wi-Fi hotspot, I'm taking those user credentials. Now, in my case, I only bought the Android functionality because it was cheaper, and why bother spending almost twice as much?
You were simply doing it for illustrative purposes,
exactly
after all.
That. Indeed.
But you got access to information. Now, you have information. What could you potentially have done with that information? Could you have accessed bank accounts, for example, and actually removed money from those accounts?
So the issue with Wi-Fi hotspots and the coffee shops generally is that in developed economies, 40% of the people who go into these coffee shops and use the wireless hotspot also do mobile banking. And when when you register for mobile banking with one of the high street banks, who are pretty good at this stuff, they're the best in terms of their provisioning for defense for their customers. They give you a random number generator, a little device that you slot your card in, but you never have that in the coffee shop. So they've already asked you for a telephone number so they can send you an SMS with a session code. If you put the pieces together, I can monitor the user name and password of the device, which means that I own that device thereafter until you change the password on that device. I can monitor your engagement with the mobile banking application, so I get your username and password for the banking application. And then I'm able to intercept the SMS, suppress the beep beep, beep beep on the telephone, and now I've got all that I need to be able to conduct your session. And in an hour, you can take 250 credentials.
The bank has done nothing wrong, I've done nothing wrong, but the money is gone somewhere into the world. Now, surely we can track this stuff. I mean, you guys have been working at tracking the bad guys in the world of cyber for decades.
The challenge is several-fold. The first is that the technology around which most of the criminals operate was born out of well-meaning, liberal-minded thinking that said at some point we need to protect freedom of speech on the internet, and we do that by protecting anonymity. We do it so effectively that we can't attribute responsibility for criminal activities. So the technology to really recognize who's been responsible for perpetrating these crimes makes it very difficult, and we've not got a good success rate.
I mean, there are syndicates behind this stuff, there are organized crime groupings all over the world that participate in this sort of activity. What sort of success has there been in not only the breaking down of these syndicates, but also the prosecution, the criminal prosecution of these cases? I can't think for a moment of any high-profile cases where this has in fact happened.
So it's one of the sad but true moments. Vast amounts of money and effort in policing. Not just financial crime, but exploitation of children and all that is associated with that. And there is some success, but at the scale at which the criminality is operating, actually it's only nibbling at the margins. And we could probably point at maybe half a dozen successes, but most of those successes are against what in geek speak we would call a bot. So one of the wide-ranging attacks that's maybe infected thousands of servers, and being able to take down those attacks.
So you suppress the activity,
but not get at the perpetrators. And it's a particular challenge, and I think until there is the ability to be able to have direct accountability for these things, we're not really going to be able to start to pull the runaway train back, but also we're not going to be able to embarrass and hold nation states to account because at the moment we can't ascribe particular responsibility for action.
What are your impressions of what nation states are up to? Because there are nation states that are hiring tens of thousands of people either to engage in cyber defense or cyber warfare, depending on your perspective, investing billions of dollars every single year in creating a capability for which we're not certain yet.
Yeah, it's one of the ultimate paradoxes that We spend billions on cyber defence, and we spend a lot of money on getting through those defences. Very few nations have got enough of these scarce resources. It's one of the realities that in terms of defending, there just aren't enough people who understand this stuff. But also those who are perpetrating the attacks, there aren't enough people that you can bring onto the book, so you need to buy the services. But in essence, whilst there may be a difference in the motivation of actions, one nation state might be about preservation of way of life and bolstering surveillance of the bad guys, another might be culturally that we're just going to bring benefit commercially and militarily. It doesn't really matter. The net effect is, if a nation state attacks a private entity, they're going to lose a lot of money and they're going to lose a lot of shareholder value. So there's no good guys in this, it's just degrees of badness.
It's a depressing scenario. Is there hope in the battle against the levels of badness, the degrees of evil that exist in the cyber underworld?
So I think it's another sad but true, that it's going to get worse before it gets better. That's partly because of the adoption of Internet of Things, as is so often the case. I
mean, this is your fridge telling you when the milk is sour and stop and get some bread.
The smart meter in your water pipe, and your connected motor car, your connected watch, all of those things. Today we've got 3 billion users and 6 billion devices. Conservative estimates say it's going to be 6 billion users and 20 billion devices in 2020. Cisco would have us believe it'll be 40 billion devices. Doesn't really matter. It's big growth, and these devices are much less secure than those things that we've been used to.
But this stuff penetrates every aspect of our lives. So throwing away our smartphone, we think we're safe. We're not necessarily, because soon you won't be able to buy anything but a smart fridge. You will be exposed at some point in the future.
Yes, and the way that we introduce these capabilities and these products into the marketplace is one where we have a very poor track record of thinking about security in the context of this kind of technical agility at the boundaries. So we think about the things themselves. We'll make a secure smart meter eventually. But then we put it into a pipe where we connect it to a system that has no security, because the engineer is only interested in the system being available. He's not interested in confidentiality. So that impeller in the pipe talks to a SCADA system that talks to a billing system, and all of a sudden someone's stealing my money because you've been counting how much water I'm using. We don't really think about the broad-based environment in which we insert these things, and then we sort of moan and say, well, you know, how could things have gone so horribly wrong? So I think it's going to get worse before it gets better. And until we raise the level of awareness where people have the same kind of level of understanding about the vulnerability and criminality that we have in terms of more normalized criminality, like leaving your phone or the wallet on the table in the restaurant when you go to the loo, then it's going to be a runaway train.
It's absolutely terrifying, but thank you for sharing with us. Peter Armstrong, he is with the Willis Group out of the United Kingdom. He is a cybersecurity expert, and he's the sort of person who tells children horror stories before they go to bed and expects them to sleep easy at night. I hope you sleep easy and a little bit more cognizant of the risks you face in your cyber world. That's it from the show for this evening. Thank you for watching. Till next time, bye-bye.